All right, guys, welcome back to the Bastion Black Performance Podcast, episode 5 here. So, I'm going to talk again about the Russian invasion of Ukraine and just kind of give some updates and talk about, some of the more information that's come out, recently. Again, so this is Wednesday, March the 9th, and at about 5 o'clock at night, 1700. So, again, this information represents the best that I am able to get at the time. Seen a lot of sources, some Russian, some Ukrainian, some are from the UK and the US and other places. So try to find, there's a few places that are able to use kind of like geolocating and verify some of the things. But again, obviously, a lot of this is, it's kind of not speculation. That's too strong of a word, but it's very fluid at this time. So I've got kind of a, what I think, as far as what I could find, as far as maps, that kind of, shade in the general areas under Russian control and of continued Russian advances, and we'll kind of play that off of our basic, just our basic Google map here in a second. So if we kind of remember, based on where we were last time. So as of last week, Russia had captured Kherson down here in the south by Crimea. So if we use our regular map here, so Kherson sits right here. And it crosses the Dnieper River here. It's got a major bridge, a couple of major bridges across the lower part of the Dnieper here. And so what makes Kherson very important is that, as we said before, coming out of Crimea, there's basically two ways that the Crimean Peninsula actually, connects to the to Ukraine proper, and then there's two basic highways or interstate systems that come north out of there. One kind of branches to the west, and one branches to the east on that. And then Kherson represents a crossing of the last major geographical barrier. So if we look at Ukraine, so the Dnieper River runs right through Kiev here and runs down kind of a little bit of a back switching pattern here. But once one gets across the Dnieper here, all of the major geographical barriers to moving north and west or just straight west are kind of gone. So at that time, we also talked about, so there had been major fighting in Luhansk, Donetsk, Mariupol, Melitopol. So we'll kind of, I'll sort of just start myself in the south and kind of work around here as best as we can. So like we said, Kherson captured. So now there's a lot of major fighting in Mykolaiv here. So Mykolaiv is basically, it's exactly what what you would predict. It's basically the next city up the road from Kherson along this major highway, which is M14. And so Mykolaiv actually also represents a crossing of, this is called like the Pivdeni Buk River here. And it sits away, Mykolaiv sits on, kind of a major little convergence and network of roads here. So this M14, as it comes out of Kherson, comes through Mykolaiv, and then it turns into a generally speaking, east to west running road over here towards the reservoir. This is called, what, like the Tulyaev Reservoir or something? I can't pronounce anything in Ukrainian worth of crap. And then towards Odessa. And then obviously then there's a couple of major north-south running highways that head up towards, Kiev and, like roughly speaking, coming out of Mykolaiv here. So we have this H14 runs up, connects into Propventinsky, which then can be pretty easily connected to the highways through Uman and stuff that comes up into Kiev proper. And then also this connects with the other highways that run back to the north and east towards Dnieper City and other places like that. So lots of fighting going on in Mykolaiv right now. And so taking that and being able to like fully exploit that, if you're the Russians, is, as far as the southern front goes, that's kind of the end game, I think, operationally speaking, because from there, now they essentially have free access to go west into Odessa, which is, sort of the last major naval port, major naval sort of entity, access to the sea and kind of infrastructure as far as that goes. It also gives them that access to move north and north and west, north and east, and kind of hook up with the other parts of the the Russian axes that are moving there. So let's kind of let's plug ourselves back over here to the east. We'll pop back over to our map here. So like we said, so Kherson, Mykolaiv here, so major fighting there. So as we kind of get Over here a little bit to the east, coming out of Crimea, so we're going to be around Melitopol and Mariupol over here. So, like we said, so there's this second road, the second highway system that comes out of Crimea, and it runs up and connects to Melitopol. So again, none of this is, like I said, is people fight and they go to places where they can control how you get to and from places and how you get things to and from places. So lots of fighting. Melitopol is being pretty hotly contested right now, it looks like. But we also know that the Russians have been and are currently in Zaparizia up here. Zaparizia sits on the Dnieper River here. Has a major crossing over the Dnieper, which is obviously a very big deal. It also has a major nuclear power plant. I believe they said it's the biggest in Russia, or the biggest in Europe. And so people have been watching that. And also it's kind of a little bit difficult to keep track of. So there's places where the Russians are, there's places where the Ukrainians are, and then there's places where the Russians are in control, or the Ukrainians are in control. And it's hard to keep all those, in track, because, keep track of all that, because it's hard. Like, how do you determine what constitutes being in control of something? So basically, when we kind of think about how our operations work in modern maneuver warfare and in deep operations, is that we will have far-ranging armored units, reconnaissance units, far-striking units that will be in various towns and cities and areas and stuff. And they might control a single road, or they might control, kind of a single, kind of avenue to supply them and being able to establish themselves in positions. But once they get off of that sort of main, supply, avenue, that main road, that main rail system, whatever it might be, they don't control anything aside from that. And that's kind of what we mean. Whereas, if we say someone's in control, so for example, in control of a city means that aside from just the main arteries of travel, that particular military, that particular, army group, army unit, whatever it is, can move off into the periphery and still operate there. And so that's what's, it makes it difficult and that's, also that's kind of part of the whole idea behind deep operations, is that, like, if you're an enemy that's attacking, someone is, like, basically they're getting reports that there's just enemy troops everywhere in their rear areas. And so if a person allows themselves to panic, you can cause a lot of problems that way. So, like we said, major nuclear power plant in Zaparizia here. And so there were reports that the Russians were shelling it. I guess it's hard to confirm what was actually happening or what that means. So, like, by shelling it, do we mean that the Russians knew for certain, hey, this is a nuclear power plant and we're going to shell the actual plant itself? Does it mean that, hey, we're trying to shell a different part of kind of this complex or this area, and some of the rounds got away from us, or we called in a poor fire mission? Or is this a big complex, because nuclear power plants is not a particularly small area geographically? Or was this a really big complex and we were dropping mortars on, say, the administration and maybe like housing and maybe some like construction workers' trailers and, things like that over here, but we weren't actually attacking the plant itself? It's hard to know with some of those things, but it obviously is something to be a cause for concern. From the potential disaster related to nuclear power plants. Now, why the Russians would want to take that? So, one, control of the power plant, being able to shut off power. I don't know what part or how much of the country the nuclear power plant in Zaparizia like powers, but for obvious reasons, being able to control electricity, being able to control power is huge. From simple things like being able to operate. Obviously, like, the cities are still pretty well populated for the most part, to be able to control the power for things like light and heat, stuff like that. But then you're also talking about like hospitals and being able to run the types of life sustainment systems that you would need for things like that. From a military operations standpoint, obviously you have radios, and you need power sources for operating things like drones and shoot, even like smaller like computer and handheld things, and be able to charge them and use them for things like artillery missions and controlling drones and stuff like that. So the power, being able to control and or eliminate power to area is very big. And in the case of nuclear power plant, it's also kind of a power move. Being like, hey, one, we control the power. Also, if we want to bomb this thing and create the potential for a huge like ecological disaster, we possess the potential to do that. So something to keep in mind there. So like I said, Melitopol down here, very hotly contested still. And again, and it makes sense here because coming out of Melitopol, and so if we pop over to, if we pop into satellite view here, maybe if it actually loads here, there we go. So Ukraine's obviously a steppe country. So if you look here, so there's one major highway coming out of Melitopol, but then if you look around, there's nothing much else around there. So basically, you're going to need that one road to get up there. Especially we know what time of year we're getting into with spring, and as you guys have been, watching videos or seeing pictures, mud and otherwise like poor conditions of non-paved, non-hardball roads has been a big deal. So this will continue to be a big deal, controlling the main roads. So as we continue to move ourselves to the east, we get over into Mariupol, and Mariupol has had a lot of fighting going on lately, and it makes total sense. If we kind of look at, we'll go back to our road network here. So Mariupol sits on this main east to west running highway, this M14 that connects Rostov-on-Don, which is in Russia, connects Mariupol, connects Berdyansk to Melitopol, down to the Crimea. So being able to control Melitopol, smaller town here, Berdyansk, and then especially Mariupol. So now basically they'll be able to completely link up these two axes, the one that was coming from Luhansk and Donetsk area, and then also connect to the highway coming off Rostov-on-Don. So Rostov-on-Don is obviously it's a fairly major area, and it's it's plugged in well as far as logistics are concerned. So that would be a major thing for the Russians being able to connect all that and get all that set up, just so that they logistically can support themselves. So it seems that it's a little bit harder to get information on exactly what they do and don't control in the Luhansk and Donetsk area. I've seen a map that shows that they control all the way, to Donetsk and Luhansk itself. So this is kind of what I'm basing myself on, which is that they basically control the road corridor here that runs to Mariupol, but then they control all the way up to the actual city of Donetsk and across to Luhansk itself. So that's what I'm going to base my my opinion on, or kind of my examination on there, and then so a flashback over to our map here. So again, as we said, so Luhansk and Donetsk sit on a couple of major roadways here, which run themselves into Dnieper City. So if they control Zaparizia, moving north to Dnieper City here, and then if this gets controlled coming east to west, if you can see, so basically this entire corridor from here all the way down to Mykolaiv would all be completely sectioned off. The Russians would control all the major roads and everything like that. So that would be a big deal. Move up into Kharkov. So it appears that Kharkov is still holding out well. And what I predicted like a couple weeks back, which was that as these, sort of what we would call like the coup de main, which is a rapid, immediate assault. So once those kind of failed, then, that they would start to openly attack civilians and residential areas and things. Okay, so as I said, so been a lot of really heavy fighting around here, and this is definitely something that the Ukrainians need to hold Kharkov and bog them down there, because like I kind of just said, so if Donetsk is actually fallen and the Russians are able to push through, Melitopol, Zaparizhzhia, and up to Dnieper City with this whole area sectioned off. Once the Russians get through this area, if they capture Kharkov, there's not a whole lot, from an operational or from a strategic standpoint to stop them from leaking up down here. And that would basically allow them to section off the entire, eastern nub of Ukraine. So not only would they control all the major roads, which would completely hamper Ukrainian operations, but then they would basically, now any Ukrainian forces that are able to fall back probably have to fall back primarily on the other side of the Dnieper River. So you had a large, a very formidable geographical barrier there as well. So that would be a very big deal if if the Russians are able to actually conquer Kharkov proper, and that would be very, very bad. So now as we continue rotating up, so the main thrust that came in from the north, and according to the information available, it seems like the majority of the troop and vehicle concentrations came from the north, which seems to make sense heading for Kiev. So the Russians, when they came across, they came across through Sumy here, Cherniev, and then there's another smaller road that they came off kind of on this side of the Dnieper and sort of northwest of Kiev over there. So Sumy has seen a ton of fighting. So there's a lot of pictures and a lot of videos and things out of the destruction and the fighting in Sumy area. Um, and then same thing over in Cherniev. Cherniv's basically just been getting absolutely destroyed, which makes sense because you need these roads coming out of Gomel and then coming out of Kursk and things allow you to move directly over into this sort of highway corridor. And then obviously the train over here gets pretty restrictive with the Pripyats and with the Dnieper. But so being able to come at Ukraine then from multiple directions to be able to section it off, separate it, and so it can be set up for an assault. As far as what's going on in Kiev. So we know for certain that the Russians they've taken and are in places like Ivankiv here, the Hostomel Airport, Irpin, and then there's another smaller town that's seen a substantial amount of fighting here. Um, is Busha. So kind of this whole corridor, which is all sort of this northwest area. So they're not quite to what's considered Kiev proper. But if you kind of look at what's considered Kiev proper here, they're basically shoring up the last of these major arteries that enter into Kiev on the western side, being able to section it off there. And there's been a lot of, sort of a lot of talk about the 40-mile long convoy and all these convoys that were stuck. And it does appear that the Russians are having substantial logistic problems, as far as moving their armor and especially the fuel and things for it. But one thing that we also need to keep in mind is that it does appear that the Russians kind of went with a little bit of what we call a coup de main attempt. So a coup de main is a rapid, sudden frontal assault on a target, basically. So the coup de main, what's typically the most effective with the coup de main is after an enemy breaks through a particular defensive line or in some way compromises a defensive sector, and then the actual operational or tactical or strategic goal that they have in front of them, rather than setting up for a siege or surrounding it or something proper, they basically just bust straight through and then immediately just hit that next goal, the major goal there, and take it over before the enemy can fall back and sort of reestablish defensive, posture and kind of, reorient their defensive lines. And so it's effective in that way. What a coup de main is not effective at is when the, sort of the initial, push, the initial portion of it fails, and the enemy is able to reinforce on it. Because as we kind of see what happened with the Russians is they kind of went for, I guess what you could call kind of the decapitation strategy, was they basically tried to bust straight at Kiev and straight at straight at Kharkov. And when those failed and they got bogged down, they did not have the logistical support and they did not have the supporting fires and the air support set up to be able to deal with that. Because we know from the first days that the Russians launched attacks on Hostomel Airport here and things like that. And it appears that they lost multiple helicopters and a lot of, their assaulting troops and things all basically immediately on that. So the coup de main is great if one has already broken through defensive lines and the operational objective that is beyond that is in and of itself relatively unprepared defensively. But it is not good if you get bogged down at all, because now you basically committed to something with no real supporting base for it. So what we're probably seeing is the Russians are going to be establishing their logistics bases. They're going to be establishing their medical facilities, their support by fire positions, out here to the north and west, and getting everything ready for the actual assault on Kiev itself. And so I thought I would use kind of an example, just from like our own generation, so things that people would probably know. So I was a participant in the Second Battle of Fallujah. And so guys who are roughly familiar with that, or maybe you participated or know people who participated yourself. So here we have the actual city of Fallujah. And so while that started in the beginning of November of 2004, one, it took months to get all of the units kind of in country that, basically the commanders already knew were going to participate. In the weeks prior, they had to move elements of the 2-7, Army's armored cav up from down around Najaf and Karbala and places like that. Moved them up there. We established additional support by fire positions. So this is the Camp Fallujah area here, what we called the Mech at the time when I was there. So we had artillery positions, like actual, like, 155 millimeter artillery positions here and things. And then if we kind of think about, like, so what we actually did, like if you just use my unit for example. So when we moved out, I think we moved out on the 7th of November. And so we kind of came out, and then we ended up, so we kind of took, so this is called, we call this Route Michigan, and this is Route Mobile, this north-south running kind of road here. And so then we ended up like way out over here, like kind of out in the boonies, like somewhere out over here. I don't really know exactly where. And so we basically sat out there for a whole day. They moved mortar positions in, they moved additional things in, we moved spotters forward and stuff like that. And then the actual first target that we hit was, as we kind of moved into position and we came down here, is there's the Fallujah train station is right here on the north side of the city. So we hit that, one of our companies did, and that's where we set up our battalion aid station. That was the battalion's forward op. There it is, finally popped up. So so that was the battalion's forward operating, not forward operating base, but forward operating area as far as all logistics and casualties and stuff like that. It's also where we had battalion 81s were set up. All the medevac stuff would come through there and things like that. And then basically, so once that was set up, we moved into the city proper. Then we kind of had this major north-south running road that we called Route Henry. And so once we took over enough of that we could kind of control it, that's the main road that we would use to go north and south to get into the other smaller sections of the city. They also moved things like, first LAR or third LAR, I can't remember. One of the light armored recon battalions from the Marine Corps was kind of, they were out here, on the other side of the Euphrates, basically blocking this area. We also had units. Well, there's supposed to be units blocking the the exits on the south who weren't really there, but they did have units down kind of on the roads and stuff like that, trying to kind of section the city off. So, just kind of, we can use examples from our own experiences in the and kind of the near term on that. But now, kind of, a couple other things to keep in mind. So it appears that I don't know what all the Ukrainians have available as far as their actual airfields. They still have something because they're obviously still able to run some of their air ops, and they're supposed to be getting more aircraft from Poland and things like that. But it does appear that they've lost Hostomel airfield. There's Venitiev airfield, which is down here as well, which apparently got hit with like 9 cruise missiles the other day and basically completely wiped off the map. So they lost that, access to that. So obviously, once you actually lose all of the airfields and the places that you have to actually run air ops out of, you kind of doesn't really matter if you actually, technically speaking, on the books have aircraft anymore, because you don't have any place to utilize them. We do know that they're still using drones effectively. The Bayraktar, I don't know how you say it in Turkish, the TB2 drones look like they've been pretty successful with using those. It does appear that the Russians have started to get their air operations a little bit in, kind of back working. It's hard to tell exactly what the major problem was with that. It looks like, in general, the Ukrainians caught them off guard with just their general willingness to resist and their effectiveness. But then it doesn't appear, and I've kind of watched, some of the other, like, YouTube channels and things that I enjoy, like, the military aviation guys. I like them for aviation specific stuff. They get a little bit more into detail on some of the actual, like, the organizational related issues of the Russians. And so, and it makes sense, what they're kind of talking about with the Russians not being able to be set up to deliver a lot of precision munitions. And so kind of having to resort more to unguided, what we call like dumb bombs and things, just because of, being able to be on target quicker and not having the great targeting pods and being able to deliver the really accurate stuff that we sort of rely on ourselves to do that. And also, as anti-aircraft defenses improve, typically speaking, aircraft move higher to get away from them, and or they launch their attacks from further away, which typically means that the accuracy goes down when it comes to, and then when it comes to some of the more close air support related aircraft, whether rotary wing or fixed wing, getting lower and closer also works to an extent. Certain, obviously certain aircraft detection and interdiction systems work better at a higher altitude and a longer range. It also means that obviously as you get closer to the ground, now you're open up to more of like the man pads, the man portable air defense rockets, such as like the Igla and the Stinger and things like that. And so, that's kind of what you see. It looks like we've sort of seen a lot of examples of that with like their helicopters. So helicopters, obviously slower than fixed wing, typically operate at a lower altitude and stay on target for a longer amount of time, which is what makes them, really effective in delivering ordnance. But it means that if they don't have top cover, they are vulnerable to enemy aircraft. But it also means that as you fly lower and slower and hang around longer than an enemy that has the ability to bring actual like shoulder fired surface to air missiles, or very easily transportable one. I think the British are sending them the Starstreak system, which is it's not a man portable, but it's basically a crew served anti-aircraft surface to air missile system, which is very small, very portable, relatively speaking. So that'll definitely start to play into that. And now we're starting to see a lot of anti-tank weapons and things that have made their way in, and the Ukrainians have been making very good usage of that. There's we know going back to 1945 Berlin, with Soviets lost an inhuman amount of tanks to German Panzerfausts in urban combat and things, and so the coordination of infantry and armor is very huge. And if they're about to make a major assault on Kiev, it'll kind of be interesting to see, because the military way to do it more effectively would be to essentially flatten the city with artillery and air power and move in cautiously with kind of a steamroller sort of approach. Infantry directly in coordination with tanks, moving relatively slowly and clearing pockets as they come to it. But that takes a long time. It's typically pretty casualty heavy. A little bit more of the kind of the quick sort of slashing assault can be effective if an enemy is going to try to fight with a fair amount of maneuver and being able to like keep some amount of mobility of moving position to position. But it also means that if an enemy elects to fight in an urban environment and try to keep a lot of mobility, that's where you put yourself at a lot of risk of crossing all of the danger areas that are the roads and the alleys and things like that. So it's relatively easy to control those from a long distance with things like tanks or armored personnel carriers that have good weapon systems, compared to just what your typical infantry does. So it'll be interesting to kind of see how they play that out, because if you strictly wanted to do it, the best way would be kind of low and slow, lots of artillery and air power crushing things in front of you, which would make it hard or impossible for the Ukrainians to concentrate in areas. And so small teams roaming around can be effective in the anti-armor role, but it's not the way that you win a battle, at the large scale, at the operational level, of just having 1,000 4-man teams. It's not the really effective way to do it if you can't operate it platoon levels and things where you can actually have platoon and company level fire support from mortars and coordination to be able to conduct local counterattacks, and things like that. So it'll be interesting. We'll kind of see how that plays out. I did see today that Ukraine is looking at very cold temperatures coming up over today and over the next couple of days. So that would be something that would be it'll be interesting to see how that plays out with this long convoy that's kind of stretched out there, because obviously the chances that they are really well set up to endure severely below zero temperatures out in the middle of nowhere is probably not very good. So one, you'll probably see a fair amount of weather-related casualties from that. I think that also means that you're going to see a fair amount of people breaking into houses, destroying houses, and otherwise messing with the civilian population in order to try to keep themselves warm or otherwise stocked. But that's about all that I have for updates right now. So again, guys, if you have any good information, any things that you could send my way, please do. Always trying to keep this, as updated as I possibly can. But remember, guys, only the hits count, and you can never miss fast enough to catch back up.